Well, the breaking news at this hour tonight is the astonishing news that Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer, John Lauro, who did a very solid and serious job in the courtroom today during Donald Trump's third criminal arraignment of the year, where Donald Trump once again pleaded not guilty. That lawyer then went on television and, in effect, pleaded Donald Trump guilty to the charge of attempting to obstruct an official proceeding and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Everyone except Donald Trump knows that criminal defendants should not speak publicly about their cases. The same is almost always true for criminal defense lawyers. The most common response from criminal defense lawyers to requests for interviews about their pending cases is one word: no. Most successful criminal defense lawyers never grant television interviews, never. Too many of Donald Trump's lawyers are too eager to talk on Trump-supporting television about their client, and so tonight, Trump criminal defense lawyer John Lauro, in his first interview after Donald Trump pleaded not guilty to conspiring, to trying to get Vice President Mike Pence to break the law, Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer actually said this.
Professor Eastman laid out a series of options that were discussed with Vice President Pence. Vice President Pence disagreed on certain issues, but ultimately what President Trump said is, let's go with option D. Let's just halt, let's just pause the voting and allow the state legislatures to take one last look and make a determination as to whether or not the elections were handled fairly.
Oh, I only wish the control room had caught Andrew Weissman's eyes widening at what he just heard here. That is a Trump criminal defense lawyer quoting Donald Trump committing a crime. Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer tonight added information to Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's 42-page description of Donald Trump's crimes. The conversation that John Lauro just described appears on page 34 of the indictment against his client. The indictment describes that conversation as a criminal conspiracy. And the version of that conversation that Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer delivered tonight is every bit as criminal as the version that appears in the indictment. On page 34 of the indictment, it says, on January 4th, the defendant, Donald Trump, held a meeting with co-conspirator John Eastman, the vice president's chief of staff, and the vice president's counsel for the purpose of convincing the vice president, based on the defendant, Donald Trump's knowingly false claims of election fraud, that the vice president should reject or send to the states Biden's legitimate electoral votes rather than count them. That criminal conduct described in that sentence was admitted tonight on television by Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer. The indictment has more about that meeting. Quote, during the meeting, as reflected in the vice president's contemporaneous notes, the defendant, Donald Trump, made knowingly false claims of election fraud, including, bottom line, won every state by hundreds of thousands of votes, and we won every state. The defendant, Donald Trump, and co-conspirator John Eastman then asked the vice president to either unilaterally reject the legitimate electors from the 7 targeted states or send the question of which slate was legitimate to the targeted states' legislatures. In a shockingly incompetent slip, to put it mildly, on television tonight, Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer actually admitted to that accusation in the indictment. Donald Trump's lawyer, you just heard him, Donald Trump's lawyer said tonight on television, what President Trump said is, let's go with option D, let's just halt, let's pause the voting and allow the state legislatures to take one last look and make a determination as to whether or not the elections are handled fairly. That is essentially what Jack Smith is accusing Donald Trump of having said. The indictment says that when Vice President Mike Pence challenged John Eastman on the legality of that idea in that meeting, quote, Co-conspirator John Eastman responded, well, nobody's tested it before. The vice president then told the defendant, Donald Trump, did you hear that? Even your own counsel is not saying I have that authority. The defendant, Donald Trump, responded, that's okay. I prefer the other suggestion of the vice president rejecting the electors unilaterally. Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer tonight on television, in effect, admitted that the indictment is an accurate description of that meeting.
Professor Eastman laid out a series of options that were discussed with Vice President Pence. Vice President Pence disagreed on certain issues, but ultimately what President Trump said is, let's go with option D. Let's just halt. Let's just pause the voting and allow the state legislatures to take one last look and make a determination as to whether or not the elections were handled fairly.
Wow. John Eastman knew that it would be a crime to do that. And John Eastman said in writing that it would be a crime to do that. What Donald Trump was asking Mike Pence to do, and what Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer tonight admits on television that Donald Trump was asking Mike Pence to do. The pause that Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer says Donald Trump was asking for was a crime, and it was the very last crime that Donald Trump and his co-conspirators asked the vice president to commit. They asked him to commit the crime many times, but the very last time Donald Trump and his co-conspirators asked Mike Pence to commit that crime was not before Mike Pence went to the Capitol on January 6th to preside over the Electoral College vote count ceremony. It was at 11:44 p.m. on January 6th, after the Trump mob attacked the Capitol, attacked police officers, said they wanted to kill Mike Pence, said they wanted to kill Nancy Pelosi, after the Capitol was under attack for hours on end, with Donald Trump doing absolutely nothing to stop it, hours after the Trump criminal mob was driven out of the Capitol building, and in the middle of the Congress's continuation of the official process of counting the electoral votes at 11:44 p.m., John Eastman put his latest criminal proposal in writing and admitted in writing at the time that it was a crime. Page 42 of the indictment says, at 11:44 p.m., co-conspirator 2 John Eastman emailed the vice president's counsel advocating that the vice president violate the law and seek further delay of the certification. John Eastman wrote, I implore you to consider one more relatively minor violation of the Electoral Count Act and adjourn for 10 days to allow the legislatures to finish their investigations. John Eastman, in that email, called the crime that he was urging the vice president to commit a relatively minor crime, a relatively minor violation of law. There he is in writing admitting that it's a violation of law. And tonight, Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer said on television that Donald Trump urged Mike Pence to commit that violation of law.
What President Trump said is, let's go with option D. Let's just halt. Let's just pause the voting and allow the state legislatures to take one last look and make a determination as to whether or not the elections were handled fairly.
We have invited Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer, John Lauro, to join us on this program tonight and at any point in the future to discuss the crime that he admitted tonight that his client committed and any other aspect of the case that he may still be reckless enough to talk about on television. Some criminal defense lawyers have significant experience talking on television. John Lauro is not one of them. He began his national television exposure this week after his client was indicted, and he offered easily dismissed, lame defenses of Donald Trump, saying that Donald Trump had a First Amendment right to advocate committing crimes, and that when Donald Trump was saying those things, he was saying them on the advice of his lawyer, John Eastman, another easily dismissible defense, John Eastman being a co-conspirator in the conspiracy. But it sounded like the only thing that John Lauro could say if he was going to do television interviews. The wisest course for John Lauro was to say nothing and to leave the public relations to Donald Trump. But today, on the single most important day of his life as a lawyer, as he stood next to a former president of the United States being arraigned for federal crimes in Washington, D.C. In the full throes of the excitement of that day, John Lauro decided to do one more TV interview. And in that interview, with a friendly network, he made the single biggest public mistake a criminal defense lawyer can possibly make. He offered a quoted version of his client speaking in a conversation already labeled criminal in the indictment that his client was facing, and he thought that he was clever enough to quote Donald Trump saying something that was going to get Donald Trump off the hook. And instead, John Lauro hooked Donald Trump in the same way that Jack Smith's indictment does. I've never seen a moment like this with a criminal defense lawyer. Never. It is inconceivable that John Lauro could get this far into this case and somehow believe what the John Eastman says in writing that he never believed. John Eastman says he never believed it, that it was legal for Mike Pence to pause the counting of the electoral votes. John Lauro had a completely competent and professional first day in court with Donald Trump. I've read the transcript of it. He was flawless in the courtroom. And then he went on TV and blew the case. John Lauro, remember, is many thousands of times smarter than Donald Trump, but he is still not smart enough to answer a Fox performer's easy questions about Donald Trump. So imagine Donald Trump trying to answer questions in his own defense on a witness stand, under oath, being cross-examined by Jack Smith's criminal trial team. John Lauro trying to make sense of what Donald Trump was saying to Mike Pence, couldn't get through a Fox TV conversation about it without further incriminating Donald Trump. Donald Trump would do much worse than John Lauro, answering questions under oath about what he said to Mike Pence. Donald Trump was under oath today for the first and probably last time in this case. Deputy Clerk, Mr. Trump, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will well and truly answer all questions propounded to you, so help you God? The defendant, I do. Donald Trump survived his under oath questioning today because he wasn't asked much more than his name and his age. And on that second question, his age, he gave an odd answer. The court, Mr. Trump, how old are you? The defendant, 7'7". Apparently, Donald Trump is uncomfortable with his age, so uncomfortable that he doesn't like to say 77. Imagine for just a moment if Joe Biden ever answered the question of how old are you the way Donald Trump did today. The network where John Lauro tonight was trying to defend Donald Trump would accuse Joe Biden of being obviously mentally incapable of serving as president. If he ever answered the question, how old are you, the way Donald Trump did under oath in that courtroom today,